So Tryndamere is a champion that I won tricks to hit diamond for the first time. As per my last video, you guys would have seen this. I went into a little bit of detail on that, but I will be going into much more detail on it here. So why exactly play Tryndamere? Let's break down a few pros. First, easy to play mechanically, no skill shots. Anyone can pick him up, basically. Spikes at level 1 and stays strong for the rest of the game. This is actually very crucial, and not a lot of champions have this. He's just strong at level 1, and he's just strong for the entirety of the game. He doesn't really fall off, really. Extremely powerful laner. I'd say this is the main reason I think he's the strongest mid laner, is that not many other champion can do before, and like, people really get caught off guard by how much this champion can snowball. Can pretty much 1v1 any champion except for like Malphite, Jax, Fiora, maybe Yone, but aside from a few champions, like, he can basically beat the crap out of anyone else. Another thing with him is that he's actually annoying even when he's behind. You're basically like a headless cockroach running around annoying the enemy team and taking turrets. And keep in mind, while they're trying to use their leads to like secure neutral objectives and try to snowball the game and to win, you're just running around taking their base. It's actually very annoying to deal with. I'm sure you guys have played against the Tryndamere. He's not even doing that well, but he's just like running around. No one can kill him, literally unkillable. And he's just taking your structures, threatening your base, trying to end the game, playing away from the team. It's such an annoying playstyle to have to play against. We'll get back into the component of being annoying because that's actually very important for Tryndamere going forward. As with any champion, there's obviously going to be weaknesses. He might be the strongest mid laner, but there's still some weaknesses with him, so I want to address that here. So first off, it's this very unique playstyle, especially for a mid laner. Aside from certain champions like Kayle, Kassadin, maybe even Echo, there aren't many champions that want to stay in the side lanes permanently. And unlike those champions, Kayle eventually wants a group after 11 or 16. Kassadin wants a group after 11 or 16. Echo wants to group sometimes to flank. Tryndamere never really wants to group if he can help it. Bear in mind, if you want to abuse this champion for elo, you are developing a skill set that is quite useless and even counterproductive on every other champion in mid lane. He's very unique. Keep in mind, this is actually a top player that can play mid. He doesn't really belong in the mid lane. He's sort of like an invasive species, but that's what actually makes him so effective. Just like an invasive species, the ecosystem of mid laners haven't evolved to counteract a champion like him. Sort of like an anomaly, and most mid laners and most mid lane champions aren't equipped with the skill sets or with the skills in general, like the champion spells, to even deal with a champion like Tryndamere. But his uniqueness is what makes him hard to learn, especially if you're a regular traditional mage mid laner. Like, this champion is going to take a while to get used to, man. There's no other way to put it. Learning how to abuse strong laning without dying to ganks can take some time. Tryndamere is actually such a dominant laner that gives you so many options. I actually found myself getting stuck on what to do with the wave. Should I freeze and run the other champion down? Should I push and roam? Should I keep it at an even state? The possibilities are endless, and it will take some time to get used to. And thirdly, this is also another thing I found quite annoying with him, is playing around the Q. So his Q, it gives him damage when he's low, and with his Fury Bar, it gives him a heal too. Playing around when you need to save the Q for the damage when you get low, or use the Q for the healing, it takes some time to get used to. If you don't use the Q for the heal, you can get some extremely good trades off, but you be risking your life doing it. It's sort of like a learning curve that comes in with champion experience, but it can be quite overwhelming at first. Like, it's such a damn simple ability, but it can get quite frustrating because you're like, damn, it's so simple, it's so hard to optimize. And that's kind of Tryndamere in a nutshell. Now, with that out of the way, let's do a very brief rundown of his abilities and what I think of them. Passive. It synergizes perfectly with your Q and your ults. The lower you get, the more crit chance. You're just whacking away at people. So at level 1, you can actually use this passive by hitting and killing 1 or 2 minions really fast, and then spinning to your opponent and then just smacking the shit out of them for a few autos. It's quite easy to get lane prio with this champion, just because if you land a few crits, it's quite hard for enemies to trade back in that sense. They sort of have to run you down. The Q heal becomes really nice after you put 3 or 4 points into it, allowing you to shrug off damage after trades. Combined with Doran's shield, Tryndamere is very hard to push out of the lane because of this spell. Moving on to his W. This ability is pretty self-explanatory. It has good chase down, especially in long lanes during split. In lane, you can start with this, spin on them, and just start whacking away. It just sort of catches people off guard. If you catch them while they're turning, they're slow, just randomly spin on them, few autos, run back. Good trade. This ability becomes usable when you're near champions. If it lights up for some reason and there's no one around you, just be careful, you might be getting jumped. Moving on. His E. This is Tryndamere's most usability with a variety of use cases. The sneaky learning curve with this skill is to use it actually as a back off during lane trades instead of an engage. A lot of the times you actually want to be using this to run away. Use your W to walk up to them, get a few hits off, and then E out, damaging them and getting yourself to safety. Its cooldown gets reduced every time you crit, and so it allows for some nasty chase downs while you're low. Another tip with E is that you can actually ult or Q during your spin. This ult. First and foremost, a skill that took me like 50 or 70 games to like fully learn this, it's better to ult earlier than later. At the beginning, don't wait that extra tick of damage to ult. The more games you play, the more you'll understand your limits on what kind of damage is coming to you. You won't believe how many times I've died with ults up simply because I was trying to go for a frame perfect one. Just ults earlier, it's better safe than sorry, because sometimes you can just lose your team the game if you don't ult when you need to. You end up trying to like maximize it and then you just die and your team loses the game. It's sometimes actually better to die with it up, but you have to make the conscious decision to die. Like, I don't want to use it now because I might have to save it this objective fight that I need to group for or something, who knows. Third, this is a neat trick. Turret dives are very easy with ults up, especially when you have sums up also. You can actually kill people straight up from like 60% HP with the turret dive. Also, another thing you can do is push and roam. If I know that a cannon minion is coming in the next wave, all I do is just push the wave super fast with E and then just run bot and just turret dive them. If they're like, both of them are like half 50%, if I have a heavy trading bot lane, I just run down, get 2 kills for free. It's so easy to snowball with this ult. Okay, so that's all the abilities. Next, we're going to go into rune setup. So here is the primary rune page I take. I take Precision, almost always take Alacrity. I've played 143 games of Tryndamere this season, and I've taken like Tenacity twice. It's not really that useful. Bear in mind, you'll always want to be split, so the enemy's team fight CC shouldn't really bother you, so there's no real reason to take Tenacity. Secondary rune page, Resolve. I would say the most important rune other than his lethal tempo is actually Demolish. And actually in some slower paced games, I would actually put Demolish above lethal tempo in terms of importance. That's how crucial this rune is, and you have to take it, non-negotiable. Second Wind. So I actually take this rune around 75-90% of the time as my last rune choice. Combined with Doran's Shield and Q, it makes Tryndamere an immovable object in the laning phase. I had a dedicated part of the video just for items, but I decided to remove them because I didn't really know what is going to be good on Tryndamere going forward, so I just want you guys to like figure that out for yourself. The build that I ended up going is like a Triforce PD Hullbreaker build. It worked like a charm. It was just like enough tankiness, enough AD, enough attack speed, enough ability haste, and enough crit with PD that you're basically unkillable. So this next part of the video is where I want to really educate you guys on Tryndamere. And this is the section I want to call the Tryndamere mindset. If you recall back to my last video, I discussed how having a strong sense of champion identity is crucial to climbing. Well, given that, let's break down Tryndamere's champion identity. Tryndamere is first and foremost a split pusher. There have been so many times I was playing Tryndamere and I could literally feel the enemy's team's brain being torn apart, trying to decide whether to contest Baron or their base. It's a super annoying playstyle, guys. It really is frustrating to play against, and you have to take advantage of that. With this in mind, here's the first pillar of Tryndamere's mindset. You contribute to objective fights by being on the opposite side of the map. I was talking to a Grandmaster mid laner actually by the name of Lovesick Candy, and he explained that the best way to contribute to fights as Tryndamere is not to be there at all. This is such a weird concept, right? Because usually you're like, wait, shouldn't you group for the objective fight? Because it's like such a big objective fight. You want to be there, you want to help out your team. On every other champion, this would be the case, but this is not true on Tryndamere. This little piece of advice that he gave me was extremely useful. So here's how it works. Make sure you get your reset in and run to the opposite side of the map of whatever big objective is spawning. Ideally 30 seconds before it spawns. I actually want to be in lane, ready to push. If it spawns and you're still in base, you're actually losing out on a lot of pressure. At that point, it becomes very easy for the enemy team to group, beat your team's ass 4v5, and then run back and answer your split with whatever objective they manage to claim. You want to be there early so you can start to annoy the enemy and have them think about answering the split. Your whole game plan is to always make them decide between whatever big objective they're going for or their base. That's why Tryndamere is so hard to learn at the start, especially for traditional mid laners, because this is the opposite of what you're taught on most mid laners, that you have to be there for the fight. As a mage, you have to be in the backline, keep yourself safe. As an assassin, you have to look for the flank and like try to find an angle to like go in on the carries. But you're playing a split push mid laner, you're not even supposed to be there at all. If anything, you're supposed to be at the split push lane way earlier. Annoy them to the point where they make the wrong decisions. Another way to look at this, guys, and this is actually the second pillar in the Tryndamere mindset, is to be as annoying as possible. You constantly want to be pushing a side lane or farming enemy camps or trying to take somebody's head off under their turret. Like I said in the pro section, with Tryndamere's ult, you're basically unbeatable in an isolated 1v1, especially with your sums up. You want to be creating as much pressure as you possibly can. Your main goal in the game is to output as much pressure as you can and draw as many people as you can towards you without dying, so your team can capitalize on the other side. You need to play the pressure game. Tryndamere and split pushers in general are all about pressure. The last pillar of Tryndamere's mindset is to take it slow in the early laning phase, which is actually kind of counterintuitive given how strong I said his early laning is, but I'll go on this a little bit later. You have power for early game, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are an early game champion. Your main way of playing the game unlocks after the first turret falls and you hop into sides. Tryndamere is actually a mid-game spiking champion. Yes, he can set himself up for the mid-game with his powerful early game, but Tryndamere actually becomes strong in the mid-game. In the early game, focus on keeping your farm up, and especially your XP up. Getting to 6 is extremely important on Tryndamere. Your first instinct should always be trying to preserve your life, since you want to stay on the map for as long as possible and vacuum up as much gold and XP as you can. The more reliable you become in getting into side lanes and executing your win conditions, the more you can start to abuse the matchups and try to force your lead early. You have to learn what it feels like to first get into the side lanes and start split pushing before you learn to optimize your early game. Remember, the mid-game spiking and the split push comes first. This also comes with a basic understanding of trading fundamentals, which is way too extensive of a topic to discuss here, but obviously more games as a champion will give you an idea of how to push and punish versus each archetype of champion. I was baited by this win percentage graph on Tryndamere on LoL Analytics into thinking he's an early game champion, but he doesn't really have to be. Safely scaling into your side lanes and into the mid game, and then becoming annoying as hell, is the bedrock of your Tryndamere journey, and your early lane leads come after mastering those fundamentals. Coming off that point, we're going to jump straight into the next part of the video, where I teach you guys how to play Tryndamere in certain parts of the game. First up is the early game. Tryndamere is an extremely powerful early game champion. His E acts as an early push as well as trading tool. It can be tempting to just spin through the wave, stack a bunch of fury, and start wailing away on your enemy laner while you regen through with Doran Shield and Second Wind. I was doing this at the start, guys. I was just like trying to pummel my opponent level 1, but it didn't really end up working because I ended up pushing my lane too much, and I was setting myself up to be ganked because I was heavy trading. I was already pushed up. It's like a freebie for the enemy jungler to come down and gank me, especially pre-level 6. A more replicable way and a more consistent way of playing him in the early game is to keep your wave at the neutral position. So perfectly balanced, not pushing, not frozen, perfectly balanced in the middle of the lane. This is honestly the best position because you have a lot of options. You can either shove, freeze, trade, or help a jungle skirmish all from this position, depending on what you need to do. It's very adaptable. It covers a lot of bases. But remember, guys, the main goal of the early game is to vacuum up gold and XP because mid-game is where you'll make most of your money. Part 2, mid-game. Mid-game officially starts when ADC moves up mid. So, something very important to note here. Sometimes your ADCs will take the turret or have the turret taken against them and will still go back to bot lane on autopilot. In this situation, it is very important to ping them mid and go bot yourself or go to another side lane yourself. You need to start to be in a side lane to start enacting your win condition. If your team doesn't know how to play around Tryndamere, it is important you let them know. Sometimes people will just go to their side lanes as if like they're a split pusher or something. You have to ping them back. You're constantly looking for that first turret to fall so you can like hop into a side lane and start pressuring the enemy. That's how you win with Tryndamere, guys. You don't want to be stuck in mid lane against mages and like have a lot of people grouping around you. That's not what you want. Once you're in the side lane, it's time to start pushing. Never switch out of yellow trinkets, buy red wards with your leftover gold, and create vision pockets around you and keep track of where the enemies are. Ideally, you should be trying to push enemy to turret without diving, and then either you can roam to help your team or probably force a TP or dive under turret. It's important not to waste our sums earlier for game states like this, because using sums here can really open up the game and start creating advantages that enemies will have a hard time coming back from later on. Remember these fundamentals when you're playing Tryndamere. You need vision to push. You are much stronger with ults and sum subs, like extremely strong, so use them wisely. You can either push and roam or push and dive. Use your common sense and learn from mistakes. Sometimes you can stay on the side of the map that the objective is on, but you're never grouped, you're just splitting constantly. Again, like I said, the most important thing is to annoy the enemy team. There's been so many times my team got into a drag fight and I just pushed up to bot tier 2, got 2 kills worth of gold, a lot of it XP, and I just left. A lot of times, even when you're behind, your best bet is still to split. Split is what your champion does, and even though it might feel correct to group and help, you're causing more headaches for your opponents when you split, because even if they win the fight, they can't enjoy their win because they have to recall and catch up to you before you start hitting inhibs. A quick tip about inhibs, guys: it's okay to die for inhibs, especially past 20 minutes. Getting an inhib is something you do with Baron. If you did it all by yourself, that's an immense amount of pressure being generated. Finally, the late game. This is usually around the 3 item mark and you're close to like level 16 or something. You're still doing the same things as before, but now with more items, you should almost never be grouping. You can confidently 1v2 most scenarios, so you can just look for a dive no matter what now. At this point, you should transition less from pushing and grouping and more into pushing and diving. Keep your sums handy and press ult sooner than later. Vision is still a high priority. You are strong but not invincible, and having eyes on the enemy team just to catch their rotations or see if who's coming to help the enemy split pusher, it's something to keep in mind. Now, to cap it all off, guys, just a little tips and tricks section, just like some nuggets of information that I found out throughout my journey. I always level ults, even though most people don't. So the leveling up your ults actually reduces the cooldown by 20 seconds. Me personally, I value those 20 seconds. You can structure wave states and like play around your ults cooldown, so I like having my ults up longer. This is just something I do. You don't have to do it. You can just keep it at level 1 for the rest of the game, up to you. Being isolated from your team and hitting turrets should feel good. That's when you know you've transitioned into the first pillar of the Tryndamere mindset. You should always be isolated from your team, guys. If you're doing that consistently and you feel good about it, that's when you know you're buying into the Tryndamere mindset. Another thing in draft that you can do is always ask for first pick and give your top player the counter. This makes it so that the enemy top counter picks to Trynd, then your top laner can counterpick their champion. It's very handy, especially given that top lane is like more counterpick focused than mid. Quick tip on sums. Ghost is actually more important than flash. You don't really need flash that much. It's nice, it's handy, it can save your ass in the early game, but Ghost is where a lot of Tryndamere's power comes from, especially in the side lanes. Lastly but not least, as for bans, just ban Malphite. Malphite is very tanky, he does a lot of damage. His kit just completely counters Tryndamere. So that's it for the Tryndamere mid guide. I'm in the process of climbing from unranked to diamond again. I'm doing this on Diana this time. In the meantime, there's plenty of other videos that I'm thinking of making, other important facets of the game that I think you guys should know. Things that come to mind are developing a growth mentality or how to not be toxic by muting all. Let me know if there's anything else that you guys want to see going forward. I'll catch you guys.